There is a rule inside the American Mafia that every member swears to uphold on the day they are brought in. You do not talk. Not to police, not to federal agents, not to anyone on the outside. Men have gone to prison for decades rather than break it. Some went to their graves protecting an organization that would have removed them the moment they stopped being useful. The code is called omerta, and for most of the 20th century, it was treated as the one thing that held everything else together. This video is about the men who broke it. Not small-time figures who knew a little and gave up a little. The men in this video were soldiers, captains, underbosses, and in one case, a sitting boss of one of New York's 5 families. Each of them took the same oath. Each of them chose, at a specific moment and for a specific reason, that it no longer applied to them. Some disappeared completely, some couldn't stay hidden. One went straight back to what he knew and got arrested again.
And one died in federal custody, having never walked free again after the day he decided to talk. 5 men, 5 cases. Here is what happened to each of them. Joseph Valachi, the man who first broke the code of silence. Joseph Michael Valachi was born on September 22, 1904, in East Harlem, New York, to Italian immigrant parents. His father was a violent drunk, and Valachi later said his upbringing was what pushed him toward crime. He started young. By his teenage years, he was running with a street crew in East Harlem called the Minutemen, a burglary gang whose name came from how fast they could break into a place and disappear. Valachi drove the getaway car. He was good at it, and that one skill gave him a reputation in a neighborhood where reputation was everything. His first arrests came quickly. Grand larceny in 1921, a botched robbery in 1923 that landed him at Sing Sing prison, where he served 9 months of an 18-month sentence. When he got out, the Minutemen had moved on and replaced him. So he started his own crew and kept stealing. By the late 1920s, he had graduated from street burglaries into the world of organized crime, attaching himself to the Reyna family, one of what would become known as New York's 5 families, working under boss Gaetano Reyna. When Reyna was assassinated during the bloody power struggle between mob factions known as the Castellamarese War in 1930 and 1931, Valachi kept fighting on the winning side. He survived that war, which was more than a lot of men could say. In 1930, Valachi was formally initiated as a made man, a full member of the American Mafia. The initiation involved a ceremony where a finger was pricked, blood was drawn, a piece of paper was burned in the initiate's hands, and an oath was sworn. He was brought into what the organization called Cosa Nostra, which translates from Italian as our thing. Outsiders called it the Mafia. Insiders never used that word. Valachi ended up in the crew of Anthony Tony Bender Strollo, operating under the family that would eventually be led by Vito Genovese and carry his name. For the next 3 decades, Valachi worked as a soldier, the lowest rank of full membership in the organization. He ran numbers rackets, handled gambling operations, and was involved in narcotics trafficking. He was never a boss. He was never a captain. He was a street-level earner who carried out orders, collected money, and occasionally did worse things when he was told to. In 1953, Valachi was involved in the arranged murder of Stephen Francie, a man who had been running businesses connected to Vito Genovese's estranged wife. Genovese ordered the hit, and Valachi coordinated it. Francie was lured to a restaurant in the Bronx and strangled. Valachi was never charged for it. He continued operating through the 1950s, but law enforcement was closing in on organized crime figures across New York. In 1959, Valachi was convicted of narcotics trafficking and sentenced to 15 years in federal prison. He was 54 years old and heading to the United States Penitentiary in Atlanta, Georgia. He had survived decades in one of the most dangerous organizations in the country. What he hadn't planned for was what would happen once he got inside. Vito,
the boss of the family Valachi belonged to, was already in Atlanta, having been convicted of narcotics charges himself and sent there in 1959. Genovese had essentially continued running his organization from his prison cell. He was surrounded by other incarcerated mob members, held court in the yard, and had things arranged so that even behind bars, people still answered to him. When Valachi arrived, Genovese was already suspicious of him. There had been whispers that Valachi might have been cooperating with federal authorities, feeding information to investigators. Whether those whispers were true at that point has been debated, but Genovese believed them. In June 1962, while the two men were both serving their sentences at the Atlanta penitentiary, Genovese approached Valachi and kissed him on the cheek. In Mafia tradition, that gesture, known as the kiss of death, was a signal. It meant you had been marked. It meant someone had already been assigned to end your life. Valachi understood immediately what it meant. He became convinced that a fellow inmate named Joseph Di Palermo had been sent by Genovese to carry out the contract on him. On June 22, 1962, Valachi grabbed a metal pipe that had been left near a construction site in the prison yard and attacked the man he believed was Di Palermo. He beat him to death. The man's name was John Sopp. He was not a mob member. He had no connection to Genovese or anyone else in organized crime. He was in prison for forgery and mail robbery and had never crossed paths with the Mafia in his life. Valachi had beaten the wrong man to death. His sentence was immediately changed from 15 years to life imprisonment. He was now facing the death penalty for murdering a fellow inmate, and he was still behind bars with Genovese, who had now publicly marked him for execution. The $100,000 bounty Genovese placed on Valachi's head made it worse. There was nowhere to go and no good option remaining. Valachi made his decision. He contacted federal authorities and told them he was ready to talk. What followed was something that had never happened before. No made member of the American Mafia had ever publicly confirmed the organization's existence, let alone described how it worked from the inside. Before Valachi, the FBI, under Director J. Edgar Hoover, had spent years publicly denying that a national organized crime syndicate even existed. Valachi was about to prove that wrong in front of the entire country. On September 25, 1963, Valachi appeared before Senator John L. McClellan's Permanent Subcommittee on Investigations of the U.S. Senate Committee on Government Operations. He arrived at the Capitol building guarded by 200 U.S. Marshals. The $100,000 bounty on his head was public knowledge by then, and the government was taking no chances. Valachi took his seat at the witness table. A short, stocky, 58-year-old man in a suit, chain-smoking cigarettes, and began speaking. The hearings ran across 5 separate appearances between September 25th and October 9th, 1963, and were broadcast on television across the country. What Valachi told the Senate committee was extraordinary. He confirmed, for the first time publicly and under oath, that the American Mafia existed. He explained that members never called it the Mafia, they called it Cosa Nostra, meaning our thing. He laid out the structure: bosses at the top of each family, beneath them underbosses and consiglieri, who acted as advisors, then captains who ran individual crews, and beneath them the soldiers, the rank Valachi himself held. He described the 5 New York families by name and identified their bosses at the time of his testimony: Tommy Lucchese, Vito Genovese, Joseph Colombo, Carlo Gambino, and Joe Bonanno. He explained the ruling body that sat above the families, a governing panel called the Commission, and described how disputes between families were settled. He walked senators through the blood oath initiation ceremony in specific detail: the pricked finger, the burning paper, the oath sworn on pain of death. He described murders he had been involved in going back to the early 1930s, explained who ordered them and why, and gave investigators a detailed map of how organized crime had operated in New York for decades. The Genovese family tree he helped construct for investigators contained 142 identified individuals. Valachi's testimony helped investigators solve several previously unsolved murders and gave law enforcement a structural understanding of organized crime they had never had before. Attorney General Robert F. Kennedy called it the biggest intelligence breakthrough yet in the fight against organized crime. J. Edgar Hoover, who had spent years insisting no national syndicate existed, was now forced to publicly acknowledge what Valachi had confirmed. Not everyone was impressed. Anonymous New York police officials quoted by the New York Times said some of Valachi's testimony was hearsay of limited value in court.
A senior police captain said that because Valachi was a low-ranking soldier, he couldn't have had direct knowledge of what the bosses were actually deciding. Those criticisms had merit. Valachi was street-level, not a decision-maker, and some of what he described was second-hand. But the structural picture he provided and the names he gave were real, and federal agencies spent years building on what he had handed them. His testimony never directly sent any major mafia boss to prison. That wasn't the point, and in the short term, it wasn't the result. The point was what it set in motion. In 1968, Congress passed the Omnibus Crime Control and Safe Streets Act, which allowed for court-ordered wiretapping in organized crime investigations for the first time. In 1970, Congress passed the Racketeer-Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act, known as RICO, which allowed prosecutors to go after entire criminal organizations rather than just individual members. Both of those laws were built, at least in part, on the foundation Valachi's testimony laid. They would eventually become the two most powerful legal tools the government used to dismantle organized crime families across the country over the following decades. As for Valachi himself, he never left federal custody. He was transferred between facilities and eventually settled at the Federal Correctional Institution at La Tuna in Anthony, Texas, near El Paso. The government provided him with comfortable conditions by prison standards. He wrote a 1,180-page handwritten memoir called The Real Thing at the Justice Department's request. The government initially encouraged him to write it, then blocked its publication after pressure from Italian-American advocacy groups. A journalist named Peter Moss, who had interviewed Valachi in his Washington, D.C. jail cell, later published a third-person account based on those interviews called The Valachi Papers in 1968. That book was turned into a 1972 film starring Charles Bronson. Valachi never saw any of it as a free man. In 1966, he tried to take his own life using an electrical extension cord in his prison cell. He survived. The mob never successfully reached him, despite the bounty. On April 3, 1971, Joseph Valachi died of a heart attack at the Federal Correctional Institution at La Tuna in Anthony, Texas. He was 66 years old. He had spent the last 9 years of his life behind bars, still under a death sentence from the organization he had belonged to for 3 decades. He was buried at the Gate of Heaven Cemetery in Lewiston, New York. There was no ceremony. No family gathered in any public way. The man who became the first person ever to publicly confirm the existence of the American Mafia died in a federal prison, having never been free again after the day he picked up that pipe in the Atlanta prison yard and swung it at the wrong man. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The next person who switched sides had even more blood on his hands, had climbed far higher inside the organization, and managed to stay out of prison for years after walking away, right up until the moment he couldn't stop himself from going back to what he knew. Jimmy the Weasel Fratiano, the acting boss who handed over his own world. Aladina.
James Fratiano was born in Naples, Italy on November 14, 1913, and arrived in the United States 4 months later when his parents brought him to Cleveland, Ohio. The family settled in Cleveland's Little Italy neighborhood, and Fratiano grew up in the streets around it.
He hated his given name from the time he was a child. He thought Aladina sounded like a woman's name, so he went by Jimmy for the rest of his life. The nickname that followed him everywhere else was not one he chose. While fleeing from police through the neighborhood as a boy, a bystander watching him run shouted that he moved like a weasel. Police noted it in his record. The name stuck, though people who knew him well were careful not to say it to his face. He started stealing young. Fruit stands first, then bigger things. By the time he was a teenager, he was already working gambling operations near the Fisher Body Auto Plant in Cleveland, under a local figure named Johnny Martin. And within a few years, he was Martin's equal partner in running the operation. His first arrest came at 19 on suspicion of assault. He was not charged. He was acquitted on robbery charges 2 years after that. Then, in 1937, at the age of 23, he was convicted of armed robbery and sentenced to 8 years in an Ohio state prison. He was paroled in 1945, and Cleveland no longer held what he was looking for. He packed up and moved to Los Angeles. In Los Angeles, the underworld was a different environment than the tightly structured New York families. Looser, still being shaped, with competing powers and an open ladder for someone willing to prove himself. Fratiano fell in with Mickey Cohen, the Jewish gangster who was in the middle of an open feud with Los Angeles crime family boss Jack Dragna.
Fratiano quickly figured out that Dragna's side represented more long-term stability. He started working for Dragna, showed he could be relied upon when things needed to get violent, and in 1947 was formally initiated as a made member of the Los Angeles crime family in a large Mafia ceremony alongside Louis Tom Dragna and Salvatore Piscopo. After 34 years of life, Fratiano was finally fully inside. He became a captain, a capo regime, by 1952, promoted by Dragna after proving his value both as an earner and as someone who carried out orders without hesitation. The 5 murders Fratiano later admitted to committing stretch across the years between 1949 and 1953. In 1949, under orders from Dragna, he and another man strangled Frank Nicoli, a bodyguard for Mickey Cohen who had refused to switch sides, to death. In 1951, alongside fellow Los Angeles mobster Frank Bompensiero, he strangled Frank Borgia,
A winemaker who had been resisting an extortion attempt by family associates.
That same year, on August 6, 1951, came the murder that people in law enforcement and organized crime would talk about for decades. 2 Kansas City men, known as Anthony Brancato and Anthony Trombino, referred to around mob circles as the 2 Tonys, had committed the serious error of robbing the cash room at the Flamingo Hotel in Las Vegas without permission from the families who controlled that territory. They had also been shaking down a mob bookmaker in Los Angeles. Dragna ordered them removed. Fratiano lured them with a false tip about a poker game worth robbing. Instead, he and another man climbed into the back seat of the 2 Tonys' car on North Ogden Drive near Hollywood Boulevard and shot both men in the back of the head. The car radio was still playing when police arrived. The murder went officially unsolved for more than 25 years.
In 1953, Fratiano's final confirmed murder involved Louis Strauss, known as Russian Louis, who had been attempting to extort Las Vegas casino owner Benny Binion. Binion reached out to the Los Angeles family and offered land near Fremont Street in Las Vegas in exchange for the problem being handled. Fratiano lured Strauss to Los Angeles, and he was strangled. For the next 2 decades, Fratiano kept working, kept getting arrested, and kept finding ways to stay operational. In 1954, he was convicted of attempted extortion and served more than 6 years at San Quentin.
In the 1960s, he and his wife started a trucking company that was earning close to $1.5 million annually, until a California newspaper exposed his organized crime connections and the company collapsed. In 1968, he pleaded guilty to charges related to fraudulent pay agreements with drivers from that same trucking business. In 1971, another extortion guilty plea. Through all of it, he was still connected, still trusted, still useful to the people above him. In 1975, the boss of the Los Angeles family, Dominic Brooklier, was sent to federal prison. Louis Tom Dragna was made acting boss on the condition that Fratiano run the family alongside him. Fratiano took it as a step toward the top. He was wrong about what it actually meant. Almost immediately after being elevated to acting boss, Fratiano was approached about murdering Frank Bompensiero, one of the very few men inside the organization he considered a genuine friend. Bompensiero was suspected of being a government informant, and as it later turned out, he was. But Fratiano didn't know that at the time. He stalled the contract for months, refusing to move forward on it, until the Los Angeles family handed the job to other associates. Bompensiero was shot and killed in February 1977 outside a phone booth in San Diego by other mob members. When Brooklier was released from prison in October 1976, his first order of business was reclaiming control. He stripped Fratiano back down to the rank of ordinary soldier. Then, in a meeting sometime before May 1977, Brooklier confronted Fratiano directly, telling him he'd been running his own crew in Los Angeles territory without permission and that he had a bad mouth. Fratiano began hearing from people he trusted that Brooklier was now going further, telling other mob figures that Fratiano had never even been acting boss at all, that he had been misrepresenting himself the entire time. To Fratiano, this was a signal he recognized. When a boss starts rewriting your history inside the organization, it means he's preparing a justification for what comes next. The final piece fell into place at the wake of a Cleveland mobster named Tony Del Santer in 1977. Fratiano sat with Cleveland crime family boss James Licavoli, who told him something that changed the calculation entirely.
Licavoli said the Cleveland family had a source inside the FBI, a female clerk who was feeding them documents. More than that, the family had already obtained the code numbers assigned to 2 FBI informants and was working on identifying their names. Fratiano understood what that meant. If the mob's mole inside the FBI was going to surface the identities of active informants, his own name could be among them, because Fratiano had for years been quietly providing limited information to federal agents in exchange for reduced scrutiny. The mob getting that list before he could act would mean a death sentence, not a trial. He didn't wait. On November 29, 1977, Jimmy Fratiano agreed to become a government witness. He was the highest-ranking member of the American Mafia to ever flip, an acting boss, someone who had been at the head of a crime family, and no one at that level had ever done it before. He pleaded guilty to murder charges connected to his role in the planning of the car bombing that killed Irish mob boss Danny Green in Cleveland in October 1977. A bombing carried out by others, but one that investigators had tied Fratiano to through the testimony of Ray Ferrito, who was himself cooperating after being arrested for the murder. In exchange for his cooperation, Fratiano received a 5-year sentence. He served 21 months. His testimony hit organized crime across multiple cities. He helped convict 5 high-ranking mafia figures in a 1980 racketeering trial, including his former boss, Dominic Brooklier of the Los Angeles family. He testified against Frank Funzi Thierry, the boss of the Genovese crime family in New York, making it one of the first successful RICO prosecutions of a sitting New York boss. He provided testimony used against Chicago outfit boss Joseph Ayupa and Colombo family boss Carmine Persico. By the time his active usefulness to prosecutors had run its course, more than 24 organized crime figures had been convicted using information he provided. In 1980,
Fratiano entered the Federal Witness Protection Program with his wife, Jean, whom he had married in 1975. The government relocated them to an undisclosed location, gave them new identities, and began covering their expenses. What followed over the next 10 years became something of an embarrassment for the program. The government was paying for food, housing, medical care, auto insurance, real estate taxes, a monthly stipend for Jean's mother, and, according to later reporting, his wife's plastic surgery. The bill reached nearly $1 million across the decade. Fratiano made himself a public figure in the meantime, co-writing 2 books about his life, The Last Mafioso with author Ovid Damaris, published in 1980, and Vengeance is Mine with author Michael J. Zuckerman, published in 1987. Both became bestsellers.
Fratiano later said he never read either one.
He appeared on television talk shows and news programs, discussed his past openly, and seemed more interested in his criminal celebrity than in staying anonymous. When Time magazine asked him how he felt after being cut off by the government, he told the reporter plainly, "I put 30 guys away, 6 of them bosses. I'm a dead man." In 1987, after the second book was published, the U.S. Marshal Service removed Fratiano from the Witness Protection Program's financial support and around-the-clock protection.
The Justice Department's stated position was that the program was not meant to function as a pension for former mob figures, and that Fratiano had demonstrated he could support himself through book sales. The FBI reportedly objected to the decision, but the Marshal Service made it, and it stood. Fratiano retained access to his false identity and government documentation, but the money and the protection stopped. He spent his final years in an undisclosed location believed to be Oklahoma City, living under an assumed name with Jean. The Alzheimer's disease he developed took hold slowly, and he suffered a series of strokes in the years before his death. The mob's $100,000 contract on his life, which he had been claiming since 1977, never produced anyone willing to collect it. On June 29, 1993, Jimmy Fratiano died peacefully in his sleep at age 79. An autopsy conducted at the office of the chief medical examiner in Oklahoma City confirmed the cause of death as complications from Alzheimer's disease. He had outlived Brooklier, outlived most of the men he had testified against, and outlived the organization's ability or desire to reach him. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The next man on this list did not climb as high as Fratiano inside his family, but what he handed over to the government was more devastating to a single boss than anything Fratiano had delivered, and the deal he cut for himself was so lopsided, it still makes prosecutors uncomfortable to discuss. Sammy the Bull Gravano, the underboss who destroyed the boss, then destroyed himself. Salvatore Gravano was born on March 12, 1945, in Bensonhurst, Brooklyn, the youngest of 3 children, and the only son of Giorlando and Caterina Gravano, both Sicilian immigrants. The family lived on 78th Street. His father worked as a painter before lead poisoning forced him out of the trade, after which both parents worked together in a small dress factory. Gravano was called Sammy from early childhood because a relative said he looked like his uncle Sammy, and the name stayed permanently. He was christened Salvatore, but almost nobody in his life ever used it. His second name, the Bull, came at age 13 after a street fight near his home, where local organized crime figures watching from a nearby bar saw him charge 2 older, bigger teenagers who had stolen his bicycle. One of the men remarked that the kid fought like a little bull, and from that point on, the neighborhood had a name for him. He was dyslexic at a time when public schools had no system for addressing it. He was held back twice before the age of 13,
and began developing a deep dislike of authority that extended to school officials. On at least 2 occasions, he struck them, breaking one man's jaw. By 13, he had joined a street gang called the Rampers. By the time he was a teenager, the organized crime world visible in his neighborhood had already made an impression. When 2 men came to his parents' dress factory demanding payoff money for the right to operate without union workers, his father handled it by speaking to an elderly, connected man in the neighborhood named Mr. Zuvito. The 2 men came back the following visit with apologies rather than demands. Gravano watched the whole thing and understood exactly what kind of power produced that outcome. His first contact with the Mafia came in 1968 through a friend named Tommy Spiro, whose uncle was connected to the Colombo crime family.
Gravano started doing larceny, hijackings, and armed robbery. By 1970, he committed his first murder. A man named Joe Colucci, who was plotting to murder Gravano and the Spiro associate he worked alongside. Before long, tension with a Colombo family member over the pace of Gravano's rise led to him being transferred out of that family entirely. He was absorbed into the Gambino family and came under the guidance of a captain named Salvatore Toddo Aurelio, who became his mentor. In 1976, after his crew's earnings and his reputation as a reliable, violent, and capable operator had been established across years of work, Gravano was formally initiated as a made member of the Gambino crime family. He later described that day as the best of his life. His ascent from there was steep. He ran gambling operations, loan sharking, and construction rackets. He opened an after-hours club in Bensonhurst called The Bus Stop that became so popular in the early 1980s that people were waiting an hour outside to get in. He started a construction company. At the height of his career, court records showed he was earning between $5 and $20 million a year. The organization put his loyalty to serious tests early. In 1978, Gambino boss Paul Castellano ordered the murder of Gravano's brother-in-law, Nicholas Schibetta, who had been making a public mess of himself through drug use, brawling, and insulting the family of a Gambino soldier. Gravano was informed before the order was carried out. He tried to get Schibetta's life spared by having him beaten severely instead, the logic being that if the punishment was bad enough, Castellano might consider it settled. Castellano did not. Schibetta was killed and dismembered. The only part of his body ever recovered was one hand. Gravano accepted it. He later said, "I chose against Nicky. I took an oath that Cosa Nostra came before everything." The 19 murders Gravano eventually admitted to stretched across the full arc of his time in organized crime. They included killing his own best friend, Luis Melito, after Gotti ordered it for insubordination. They included a 16-year-old boy named Alan Kaiser, who was shot in 1977 after he witnessed Gravano and an associate carry out a drive-by shooting. The full list spans business disputes, loyalty tests, and organizational housekeeping. None were prosecuted before his cooperation agreement. The event that reshaped the Gambino family and set everything that came after into motion was the murder of boss Paul Castellano on the evening of December 16, 1985. Castellano was shot outside Sparks Steakhouse on East 46th Street in Midtown Manhattan, alongside his driver and soon-to-be underboss, Thomas Bellotti. Gotti had orchestrated the hit. Gravano played a central role in its planning and execution, along with Frank DeCicco, Angelo Ruggiero, and Joseph Armone. After Castellano was dead, Gotti took control of the family. He elevated Gravano steadily over the following years, to captain, then consigliere, then underboss in 1988. By 1990, Salvatore Gravano was the second highest-ranked member of one of the most powerful organized crime families in the country. Beginning in January 1988, Gotti had been requiring his captains to meet with him weekly at the Ravenite Social Club at 247 Mulberry Street in Little Italy, Manhattan. Gravano warned him against it, recognizing that requiring that many identifiable organized crime figures to congregate in one place on a regular schedule
was an unnecessary risk. Gotti ignored the advice. The FBI had already been watching the Ravenite for years. By late 1989, agents had placed 3 separate listening devices inside the building, one in the main room of the club, one in a rear hallway, and one in an apartment on an upper floor where the widow of a Gambino soldier lived. It was the apartment bug that proved most damaging. Gotti spoke candidly there, discussing murders, the family's structure, and internal business in terms that were later played directly for juries. On December 11, 1990, FBI agents and New York City police detectives raided the Ravenite and arrested Gotti, Gravano, and consigliere Frankie Lux Locascio. All 3 were held without bail after pre-trial hearings where the government played tapes from the bugs. The recordings were devastating. Both Gotti and Gravano's attorneys, Bruce Cutler and Gerald Shargell, were disqualified from representing their clients after prosecutors argued they were effectively part of the evidence, having been present during some of the recorded conversations. Being stripped of the lawyer you trusted, facing recordings of your own conversations about murders, with bail denied. For Gravano, the picture was already bad. What made it worse was what the FBI played for him. Investigators played Gravano recordings of Gotti from the Ravenite's apartment bug, in which the boss spoke disparagingly about Gravano, called him greedy, and shifted blame for various crimes in Gravano's direction. On those tapes, recorded in private, Gotti had discussed the murder of Liborio Milito, Gravano's partner, and had framed various criminal acts in ways that implicated Gravano while protecting himself. For Gravano, hearing this produced a straightforward calculation. Gotti was already setting him up to carry the weight at trial, and the recordings were going to be used against them both regardless. On November 13, 1991, Gravano formally agreed to cooperate with the government. He pleaded guilty to a single RICO racketeering charge and agreed to debrief federal agents on every crime he had ever committed, including all 19 murders. The trial of John Gotti and Frank Locascio opened in January 1992 in the U.S. District Court for the Eastern District of New York before Judge I. Leo Glasser. The jury was anonymous and, for the first time in a Brooklyn federal case, fully sequestered, a precaution taken specifically because of Gotti's well-documented history of jury tampering. When Gravano appeared as the government's primary witness, he testified for 9 days. He described the murder of Castellano in specific detail, explained the structure of the Gambino family from the inside, and connected Gotti directly to multiple murders that had gone unsolved for years. On April 2, 1992, the jury found Gotti guilty on all 13 counts of the indictment. Gotti and Locascio were each sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Gotti was transferred to the United States Penitentiary at Marion, Illinois, and died of throat cancer there on June 10, 2002. Having never taken another free step. Gravano's sentencing came in 1994. The government had agreed to let the court sentence him without regard to what sentencing guidelines would normally require. A federal judge gave him 5 years. Because he had already been held for just over 4 years while cooperating, the remaining sentence came to less than 1 year. By the time he walked, his testimony had been used in cases against 39 people in organized crime, with several more prosecutions still pending. He entered the Witness Protection Program under the alias Jimmy Moran and was relocated to Arizona. He left the program in 1997, the same year that author Peter Maas published a biography about his life called Underboss, based on extended conversations with Gravano. After leaving the program, Gravano gave television interviews, including a nationally broadcast sit-down with journalist Diane Sawyer. He started a construction company in the Phoenix area called Marathon Development and a swimming pool installation business. By the late 1990s, his son Gerard had become close with a 23-year-old man named Michael Papa, who led a gang called the Devil Dogs. Papa had built a distribution network for selling the drug MDMA, commonly known as ecstasy, to teenagers across the Phoenix metropolitan area.
Gravano put money and organizational authority behind the operation.
Once he was fully involved, the ring's weekly sales reached between 20,000 and 25,000 pills, with profits reported at over $300,000 per week. Pills were being sold for as much as $25 each. The Arizona operation attracted its own law enforcement surveillance, including wiretaps. During one phone monitoring session, Phoenix police listened as Gravano found a listening device on a phone in his apartment, unleashed a barrage of profanity at it, and then ripped it out of the wall. On February 24, 2000, police executed 14 simultaneous raids at 6 a.m. across the Phoenix area. Among the 36 people arrested that morning were Gravano, his son Gerard, his daughter Karen, and his ex-wife Deborah. Police also seized 23 firearms and $90,000 in cash. The prosecution of the drug case had an unmistakable shape to it. The man who had destroyed John Gotti by agreeing to testify for the government was now being prosecuted using testimony from Michael Papa, who had agreed to testify against Gravano in exchange for a reduced sentence. Gravano pleaded guilty in June 2001 to 10 counts, including conspiracy to distribute dangerous drugs, participating in a criminal syndicate, and money laundering. The federal court sentenced him to 20 years. The Arizona court sentenced him to 19 years to run at the same time. In 2015, a federal judge denied his request for early release, citing his lack of remorse and the continued risk he posed to public safety. He was released in September 2017 after serving just over 17 years and placed on federal parole for life. He was 72 years old. The Gambino family had placed a murder contract on him after a 1999 newspaper interview in which he discussed his life in Arizona openly, but it was never carried out. As of 2020, he started a YouTube channel and podcast called Our Thing. In May 2025, he publicly announced he had become a born-again Christian. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The next man on this list never reached underboss, never climbed that high in the organization, and was never even officially a made member. But what he handed the government when he flipped became the most famous mob cooperation story in American pop culture history. And the movie it inspired is still considered one of the greatest crime films ever made.
Henry Hill, the associate who couldn't stop talking, couldn't stop using, and couldn't stay hidden. Henry Hill Jr. was born on June 11, 1943, in the East New York section of Brooklyn, to Henry Hill Sr., an Irish-American electrician, and Carmela Costa Hill, a Sicilian-American. He was one of 9 siblings growing up in a working-class household where money was tight and the neighborhood itself did most of the educating. Directly across the street from the Hill family's apartment sat a cab stand and shoe shine operation run by a man named Paul Vario, a captain in the Lucchese crime family. Hill later described watching the men who came and went from that cab stand as the single most formative experience of his childhood. The suits, the cars, the way people moved out of their way. By age 11, in 1955, he had wandered across the street looking for after-school work. Vario gave him errands to run. 2 years later, at 13, Hill first encountered James "Jimmy the Gent" Burke, a Lucchese associate who ran his own crew of hijackers and reported to Vario's network. Burke was everything Hill wanted to be: commanding, feared, generous with the people he trusted. When Hill served drinks and sandwiches at a card game, Burke tipped him with $20 bills without a second thought. By 14, Hill was collecting bets and loan shark payments from construction sites for the Vario brothers.
He was earning $190 a week just for being a listed union member at a job he barely showed up to, with more money on top for running. He dropped out of school and never went back. His parents didn't find out right away. There was one thing that permanently limited what Hill could become inside that world. He was half Irish. The rule for becoming a made member of the Mafia, a full, formal member with all the protections and obligations that came with it, required a man to be of full Italian descent on both sides.
Hill's father disqualified him permanently. He would always be an associate, not a member. The Vario crew didn't particularly care. They valued people who earned money and kept their mouths shut, regardless of bloodline. Hill did both, at least for a long time. At 16, his first arrest, caught using stolen credit cards to buy tires for a Vario brother, produced only a suspended sentence because the family's lawyers handled it. More importantly, Hill didn't say a word to police. That silence cemented his reputation faster than almost anything else could have. He was valuable. In June 1960, at 17, Hill joined the U.S. Army and served with the 82nd Airborne Division at Fort Bragg in North Carolina. He came back and went straight back to work with the Vario crew. The crimes he participated in across the 1960s covered hijacking, arson, credit card fraud, and robbery. In April 1967, Hill and associate Tommy DeSimone broke into the Air France cargo vault at JFK Airport and walked out with $480,000 in untraceable cash and valuables. They paid $750,000 in tribute to the two mob bosses whose turf covered the airport, their own captain Paul Vario and Colombo family captain Sebastian Buster Alloy. In November 1972, Hill and Burke were convicted of extorting a man named Gaspar Chaccio in Tampa, Florida, who owed a gambling debt to a union official they were connected to. Both were sentenced to 10 years at the United States Penitentiary in Lewisburg, Pennsylvania. Hill served 4 years and was released in July 1978. In prison at Lewisburg, Hill met a man from Pittsburgh who, for a fee, taught him how to bring drugs inside. When Hill got out in 1978, he immediately put that knowledge to use commercially. He built a drug distribution network that moved cocaine, heroin, marijuana, and quaaludes wholesale, connecting sources he had found in prison to buyers in Pittsburgh and beyond. Vario had explicitly forbidden anyone in his crew from touching drugs. Hill did it anyway and kept it hidden for as long as he could. Within months of his release, something far larger was being discussed among the people around Burke. A Lufthansa Airlines shipping clerk named Louis Werner had accumulated gambling debts to a bookmaker named Martin Krugman, who was an associate of Hill's. Werner offered Krugman information instead of money, specifically the layout and security details of the Lufthansa cargo terminal at JFK Airport, where large amounts of untraceable foreign currency regularly came through. Krugman brought it to Hill, who brought it to Burke. Burke assembled a 6-man crew and planned the robbery. Hill did not take part in the actual theft, but helped with logistics and confirmed the intelligence about the cash shipments. At 3 a.m. on December 11, 1978, Burke's crew cut the padlock on the gate of Building 261 at Kennedy Airport, entered wearing ski masks, held 10 airport staff at gunpoint, walked to the vault, and removed 72 15-pound boxes of bundled cash. The operation took 64 minutes. They drove to a garage in Canarsie, Brooklyn, transferred the money into car trunks, and dispersed. The total take was $5.875 million. $5 million in untraceable cash and $875,000 in jewelry, making it the largest cash robbery committed on U.S. soil to that date. The only person convicted for the heist was Werner, the inside man, who was sentenced to 5 years because he had no direct knowledge of Burke's crew and couldn't trade names for leniency. The cash and the jewelry were never recovered. What followed the heist was a systematic elimination of almost everyone connected to it. Parnell Stacks Edwards,
who was supposed to drive the getaway van to a crusher, but instead left it parked at a fire hydrant in Brooklyn for 2 days where police found it, was shot 5 times in the head 1 week after the robbery. Burke ordered it. Krugman, the bookmaker who had made the introduction and began loudly demanding his cut, disappeared in January 1979 and was never found. Over the next 7 months, Burke carried out or ordered the deaths of at least 9 people who had either participated in the heist, helped launder the money, or knew too much. He wanted to keep the entire amount rather than pay out shares, and eliminating the people he owed was cheaper than paying them. Hill was watching this and understood his own position. He was still moving drugs outside of Vario's knowledge, still deeply addicted to cocaine, and now connected to the biggest unsolved robbery in American history. In April 1980, federal narcotics agents arrested Hill in Nassau County, New York, on drug trafficking charges. The FBI played him recordings of conversations in which Burke and Vario discussed the need to have Hill removed. The word used was whacked. Burke had been telling Hill they should meet at a bar Hill had never heard of, owned by someone he didn't know. Hill recognized that pattern, an unfamiliar location suggested by someone who wanted to control the setting. He never showed up. With a long sentence looking certain and the realistic possibility that his own crew was already planning to end his life before he could testify about anything, Hill agreed to become an informant. He signed a formal agreement with the Brooklyn Organized Crime Strike Force, led by Edward McDonald, on May 27, 1980. He told investigators everything about the Lufthansa heist, about the drug operations, about crimes going back years. During the debriefing, FBI agents mentioned his frequent trips to Boston around the time of the robbery, which led Hill to also disclose his involvement in a basketball game point-shaving scheme he and Burke had run with members of the Boston College team during the 1978-79 season, bribing a player named Rick Kuhn to ensure the team didn't cover the gambling spread on a series of games. Hill hadn't planned to discuss that. He disclosed it anyway, and it added to the stack. Hill's testimony directly led to 50 convictions. Paul Vario received 4 years for helping Hill obtain a no-show job that gave Hill union cover for his criminal income, the conviction that finally removed him from the street. Burke was sentenced to 20 years for the Boston College point-shaving scheme. Burke was later convicted of the separate murder of a swindler named Richard Eaton and sentenced to life. He died in prison on April 13, 1996, of cancer at age 64. No charges related to the Lufthansa heist itself were ever successfully prosecuted. In 1980, Hill, his wife Karen, and their 2 children, son Greg and daughter Gina, entered the U.S. Marshals Witness Protection Program. The family was relocated at least 10 times across the following years, moving through cities including Omaha, Nebraska, Independence, Kentucky, and Redmond, Washington, under aliases that changed with each move. In 1981, while still legally married to Karen and living under a new identity, Hill got involved with a woman named Sherry Anders and married her in Virginia City, Nevada. That bigamous marriage collapsed, but it was one of many signs that the structure the program tried to impose on Hill's life wasn't holding. He could not stay away from drugs. He could not stop talking about who he was. He kept making himself recognizable to the people around him. In 1985, journalist Nicholas Pileggi published Wise Guy: Life in a Mafia Family, a non-fiction book built around extensive interviews with Hill about his life in the Lucchese organization. It was a bestseller. 5 years later, in 1990, Martin Scorsese directed a film adaptation titled Goodfellas, starring Ray Liotta as Hill, Robert De Niro as Burke, renamed Jimmy Conway for the film, and Joe Pesci as Tommy DeSimone, renamed Tommy DeVito. The film received 6 Academy Award nominations. Hill was paid $480,000 for the rights to his story, according to his own account to reporters. He later told a UK newspaper he made $550,000 from the film in total. In 1987, Hill was convicted of cocaine trafficking in a federal court in Seattle and expelled from the Witness Protection Program. He received 5 years probation. Karen filed for divorce in 1990, and it was finalized in 2002. After leaving the program, Hill made no effort to stay hidden. He gave television interviews, appeared repeatedly on The Howard Stern Show, often visibly intoxicated, and embraced the public identity of a reformed gangster turned media personality. He worked for a time as a chef at an Italian restaurant in North Platte, Nebraska. He opened a restaurant called Wise Guys in West Haven, Connecticut in October 2007. It closed the following month after a fire. The arrests continued throughout the 2000s. In 2004, he left luggage containing drug paraphernalia at an airport in Nebraska and was arrested. He was sentenced to 180 days in prison in 2005. In 2009, he pleaded guilty to 2 misdemeanor counts of public intoxication and received 2 years of probation. Later that year, he was arrested again in Fairview Heights, Illinois, for disorderly conduct and resisting arrest. Despite all of it, the organized crime figures he had testified against, those still living, made no serious move against him. Most of his former associates were dead or had been serving decades-long sentences since the early 1980s. Henry Hill died on June 12, 2012, one day after his 69th birthday, from complications related to long-term heart disease in Los Angeles. He had been a chronic smoker for most of his adult life. His girlfriend of several years, Lisa Caserta, told CBS News that he had suffered a heart attack and that the heart disease had been building for a long time. She said he went out peacefully, surrounded by family. He was cremated the following day. The Lucchese family never reached him. Ray Liotta, who had played him in the film, said he had only met Hill a few times in real life, but noted that he had clearly lived a complicated existence. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously.
The last man in this story never killed anybody personally, never ran drugs, and never held any position remotely close to underboss or acting boss. But what he surrendered to the government when he finally decided to cooperate was something none of the previous 4 men had ever handed over: the sitting boss of an entire New York crime family, along with 270 gold bars and $7 million in cash he had hidden in his own home. Joseph Big Joey Massino, the last Don who became the first boss to break. Joseph Charles Massino was born on January 10, 1943 in New York City, the second of 3 sons born to Anthony and Adeline Massino, both of Neapolitan descent. The family lived in Maspeth, Queens. By his own later admission, he was a juvenile delinquent by age 12. At 14, he ran away from home to Florida. He dropped out of Grover Cleveland High School in 10th grade and never went back. In 1956, as a teenager, he met a girl named Josephine Vitale, who lived nearby. He married her in 1960. The marriage would produce 3 daughters, and his friendship with Josephine's younger brother, Salvatore Vitale, would shape the next 4 decades of his criminal career in ways neither of them could have predicted at the time. Maspeth in the 1960s was organized crime territory. A Bonanno family captain named Philip Rusty Rastelli operated there, running a protection racket through something he called the Workmen's Mobile Lunch Association. Essentially, a system where lunch wagon operators paid him membership dues in exchange for a guarantee of no competition on their routes. Massino came to Rastelli's attention after committing his first murder in the late 1960s, shooting a Bonanno associate named Tommy Zumo dead in the lobby of a Queens building. He was worried for a time that Rastelli would find out and kill him for it. Zumo had connections to Rastelli's circle. Rastelli never discovered Massino's involvement, and through the help of a Rastelli nephew, Massino eventually became Rastelli's protege instead. Rastelli gave him a lunch wagon operation to run as a front. Massino used it to run numbers and fence stolen goods,
while building a truck hijacking crew that operated with his brother-in-law, Salvatore Vitale, at his side. By the late 1960s, he was a Bonanno associate.
On June 14, 1977, in a ceremony held in a Queens bar, Carmine Galante, who was at the time asserting himself as the Bonanno family's boss over the objections of the imprisoned Rastelli, formally initiated Massino as a made member of the family. During the ceremony, Galante asked each initiate who the boss of the Bonanno family was. Each man answered, "You." Massino answered Rastelli. Galante paused, then said he was right, but that as of the previous week, Galante himself was now the boss. Massino already knew exactly where his loyalties were placed, and he made it plain in that room. In July 1979, Galante was shot and killed while eating lunch on the outdoor patio of Joe and Mary's Italian-American restaurant in Bushwick, Brooklyn. He was hit multiple times by masked gunmen. Rastelli, operating from prison, had successfully gotten the other New York families to sanction the murder of a man who had been operating recklessly and cutting other families out of drug profits. Massino was a Bonanno captain by this point and had supported the move. With Galante gone, a power struggle erupted inside the family between the Rastelli loyalists and a faction of captains who opposed Rastelli's continued leadership. Chief among them, Alphonse Sonny Red Indelicato, Dominic Big Trin Trinchera, and Philip Giacone. In early 1981, Massino received word that the three opposing captains were stockpiling automatic weapons and planning to move against the Rastelli faction. He went to Colombo boss Carmine Persico and Gambino boss Paul Castellano for guidance. Both told him to act immediately. Massino arranged a meeting at a social club in Brooklyn for May 5, 1981, inviting the three captains under the pretext of a sit-down. He had 4 gunmen hidden inside a closet. When Trinchera, Giacone, and Indelicato arrived, the gunmen emerged and shot all 3 of them to death. Vito Rizzuto, the future boss of the Montreal Rizzuto crime family, was among the gunmen in the closet. The 4th man present, Frank Lino, escaped by running out the door. Indelicato's body was found in an area of Brooklyn, Queens called The Hole, a low-lying strip of perpetually flooded vacant lots near the borough border, on May 28, 1981. The other 2 bodies were hidden in separate locations and were not discovered until Massino himself directed investigators to them decades later. Shortly after the triple murder, a separate problem emerged that could have unraveled everything. A man named Donnie Brasco had been working his way into the Bonanno family since 1977, vouched in by Captain Dominic Sonny Black Napolitano. Massino had been suspicious of Brasco from early on and had told his own crew to keep away from him. He was right to be. Donnie Brasco was Joseph Pistone, an undercover FBI agent who had spent 6 years embedded inside the Bonanno family gathering evidence. His infiltration became public in 1981. Massino immediately had Napolitano, who had vouched for the agent, located and killed. Benjamin Ruggiero, who had formally sponsored Pistone for membership, was also targeted. The fallout from the Pistone operation led to a federal indictment, and Massino spent part of 1982 as a fugitive in the Pennsylvania town of Milford before eventually surrendering. He was convicted of labor racketeering in 1987 and sentenced to 10 years in federal prison. Rastelli was convicted in the same case and received 12 years. While Massino was in prison, Rastelli's health deteriorated. Rastelli died in June 1991 while still incarcerated. Massino, still serving his sentence, was named boss of the Bonanno crime family. He was released in 1992 and began rebuilding an organization that had been bleeding members, credibility, and money since the early 1980s. He approached the task methodically. He shut down the family's traditional social clubs, which had become surveillance magnets. He restructured how crews communicated with one another, creating a cell-like system where members of different crews were forbidden from contacting each other directly.
He required that new members be vetted with extreme scrutiny before they could be considered for initiation. He grew the number of active MAID members from roughly 80 in the early 1990s to around 110 by 2000. He moved family meetings to remote locations, sometimes out of the country entirely, to make FBI monitoring harder. And he issued a rule that no one in the family was to say his name out loud. If they needed to refer to him in conversation, they were to tug on their ear. The gesture earned him a second nickname, the Ear. His first had been Big Joey, a reference to the considerable weight he had put on since his youth. Through the 1990s, as the bosses of the Gambino, Genovese, Colombo, and Lucchese families all ended up incarcerated, Massino remained on the street.
He was the only sitting boss of any of New York's 5 families not serving time. The press began referring to him as the Last Don. The Bonanno family had been running its operations through union racketeering, construction industry extortion, loan sharking, gambling, and private sanitation business control. At the peak of his reign, law enforcement estimated the family's criminal earnings reached tens of millions of dollars annually. Massino lived in Howard Beach, Queens, a few blocks from John Gotti's home, and co-owned the well-reviewed Casablanca restaurant in Maspeth. He gave FBI surveillance teams parking lot greetings rather than avoidance, memorized their license plates, and on at least one occasion reportedly apologized to a federal agent who had been tailing him and lost him. To people who only saw him from the outside, he looked like a heavy-set, affable restaurant owner who liked to cook. By 2000, federal investigators had rebuilt their intelligence picture of the Bonanno family to the point where a comprehensive prosecution was viable. Massino had been aware his exposure was growing. On January 9, 2003, he was arrested alongside Salvatore Vitali in a sweeping RICO indictment that included, among other charges, the 1981 murder of Dominic Napolitano. He was denied bail and transferred to federal detention. Vincent Vinny Gorgeous Basciano, so named for his obsession with personal grooming, took over as acting boss in his absence. What Massino had not counted on was how many of his own men were already talking. Frank Coppa had become the first MAID Bonanno member to flip, followed by acting underboss Richard Cantarella, then soldier Joseph D'Amico, and then Salvatore Vitale, Massino's own brother-in-law, the man who had been at his side since they were teenagers in Maspeth, agreed to testify against him. Massino responded by putting out the word from prison that he wanted Vitale killed. Prosecutors heard about it and told Vitale, which only deepened his cooperation. 3 other Bonanno MAID men joined the government's side before the case even came to trial. The trial opened in 2004 in federal court in Brooklyn. The evidence was overwhelming. On July 30, 2004, the jury convicted Massino on all counts: 7 murders, racketeering, extortion, loan sharking, and related charges. A separate 8th murder charge was filed afterward, this one carrying the possibility of a death sentence. Massino was 61 years old, facing 2 life sentences and now potentially facing execution. He requested a private meeting with prosecutors. On October 15, 2004, Joseph Massino became the first sitting boss of any of New York City's 5 families to agree to cooperate with the federal government. No mafia boss at his level, in his city, had ever done it before in the history of American organized crime. What he delivered was extensive. While still in federal detention, Massino agreed to wear a government wire during conversations with Basciano. The recordings captured Basciano discussing the 2004 murder of a Bonanno associate named Randolph Pizzolo, and separately making threats against a federal judge and an assistant U.S. attorney. Massino directed investigators to the hidden bodies of the 2 1981 murder victims whose locations had never been found. They were recovered from the spots he described. His cooperation produced evidence used in 10 separate criminal cases and investigations into 4 successive Bonanno acting bosses.
As part of his sentencing agreement on June 23, 2005,
Massino pleaded guilty to the 8th murder charge, the killing of Montreal-linked Captain Gerlando Sciascia, and received 2 consecutive life sentences, with the understanding that the court could reduce those sentences based on his continued cooperation. His wife, Josephine, negotiated a forfeiture settlement that same day. The government took $7 million in cash that had been hidden in the attic of their Howard Beach home, along with 257 gold bars that had been hidden in the Casablanca restaurant, plus several properties. The Massinos were allowed to keep their home and the home of Massino's elderly mother in Middle Village, Queens. Massino testified in person for the first time at Basciano's murder trial in April 2011. Basciano was convicted and received 2 life sentences. At the conclusion of the hearing, Massino told the courtroom, "I pray every night for all of the people I hurt, especially the victims' families." On July 10, 2013, Brooklyn, U.S. District Judge Nicholas Garofis, who praised Massino in open court as potentially the most important organized crime cooperator in the modern history of federal law enforcement, reduced his 2 life sentences to time served, approximately 10.5 years. Massino was ordered to serve 2 more months before being released, and he was placed into the Witness Protection Program and put under FBI supervision for the remainder of his life. He received Social Security payments from the U.S. government. He spent his remaining years in an undisclosed location. His health had deteriorated significantly. He suffered from diabetes and obesity throughout his later years. On September 14, 2023, Joseph Massino died at a rehabilitation clinic in the New York City area. He was 80 years old. The Bonanno family he had spent decades building and protecting had by then been effectively dismantled. The organization he handed back in 1992 as a functional criminal enterprise was, by the time of his death, a fraction of what it had been, stripped of leadership through successive prosecutions that his own cooperation had accelerated. The 5 men in this story, Valachi, Fratiano, Gravano, Hill, and Massino, each broke the same oath, for different reasons, at different moments, and paid different prices. What connects them isn't just the act of cooperating, but what their cooperation revealed about how fragile the code of silence actually was when the alternative was a lifetime behind bars or something worse. The organization that presented itself as unbreakable was broken, repeatedly, by the very people who swore to protect it. If you enjoyed this breakdown, make sure to subscribe. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.